Assalamu alaikum fam, hope you're doing well. We are continuing our reading of Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Totally nerdy, I really enjoy it. He is a very witty man. Let's continue. Thus I too once cast my delusion beyond man, like all the afterwardly, beyond man indeed. Alas, my brothers, this God whom I created was man-made and madness. So notice this. So he's really taking a lot of digs at Christians, But here, you see something quite interesting. This God whom I created. So some people can raise things up to God's status. So you can take a principle of charity when it comes to Nietzsche in this way, right? Where he can see that he created something that was also a detriment. Madness. If you created something and it's become to you like a god and you're attached to it and it's madness, well, you've done something bizarre and strange, right? No doubt he's trying to purposely ruffle feathers. So don't let him dig into you too much, but rather stand back, hear what he's saying, and then try to rationally yet poetically get around what he's saying. That's what I like to do. Like all God's man he was, and only a poor specimen of man and ego. So here you go again. Man and ego. A poor specimen. Now when he says gods in the plural, you can also imagine the polytheistic faith. You have the Aztecs, you have the Mayans. Remember how when we read the Popol Vuh a while back, there was constantly tricking going on. Now in the Egyptian mythology as well, and especially in the Greek mythology, there is so much tricking going on. So here, when he says there's madness and all the gods are like that, you have to kind of take a step back and see how many of the ridiculous polytheistic religions have this sort of madness to them. Just like when you learn about Ganesh, the elephant-headed figure in Hinduism, his head was chopped off by his own father who was mistaken. So already there you get to see how there's deities in their faith that are not all-knowing. Right? The fact that you wouldn't know it's your own son and you would cause an accident and then replace his head with the head of an elephant, is quite odd. Out of my own ashes and fire this ghost came to me, and verily, it did not come to me from beyond. What happened, my brothers? I overcame myself, the sufferer. I carried my own ashes to the mountains. I invented a brighter flame for myself. So here, what are you getting at? Ashes from the fire, when you totally destroy something and rebuild it. This is a theme you'll find in sort of the Asian cultures where you will break something down so badly it will come back up again stronger, right? So when he says ashes and this sort of fire and this ghost came up, you have to really take a step back and analyze what is he saying here on a metaphorical level. And when he says he carried his own ashes to the mountains, he kind of dumped out his former self that he destroyed. You see that? If you've ever had to, if you're Muslim, you probably don't do cremation. I don't think we're not supposed to, from what I've learned. But my mom and my grandfather want to be cremated, and how that process is the bodies are burned in the incinerator. The bones are not charred like to ash. They're, the flesh is torn away, and they have to actually put the bones into a grinder. Tick, 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 and they get, those ashes are ash, but also tiny powdered bones. And they give you an urn, and they show you how you can open it, and she wants to be poured out into the ocean under the Golden Gate. And I think my grandfather just wants to be left in his vessel. But when you have taken something into an ash form, you have ground it down so finely that it can't be reconstructed. Now, Allah is capable of all things, but He's meaning in a different poetic way, right? So, for someone to have destroyed to ash something that they overcame of their former self, they take that, they pour it out in the mountains. They've gone to a noble place to bury something, to dispose of something. When you talk to people who want to be cremated, there's a big talk about what they want to be done with their ashes. Quite different than people who would like to be buried. And behold, then this ghost fled from me. Now it would be suffering for me and agony for the recovered to believe in such ghosts. Now it would be suffering for me and humiliation. Thus I speak to the afterworldly. So here, he's gone into a kind of a really dark route, right? That the ghost came to him, and it didn't come from beyond. He overcame himself. He calls himself the sufferer. He went to invent something brighter for himself, a brighter flame, and then the ghost fled from him, and now he will no longer really believe in ghosts such as this, and now the ghost will actually be humiliated and suffer. And he contends he's speaking to the afterworldly. Very nerdy, very cryptic, you know? When it comes to Nietzsche, everybody pretends like there's only one interpretation. I feel like real philosophers know when it comes to something as open and creative and literary as this, you can take what you want from it, right? So however you think he meant that is as valid as someone else's. It was suffering and incapacity that created... I was cooking some peanut sauce with cayenne. Whew, spicy. It was suffering and incapacity that created all afterworlds. This and that belief of madness of bliss. Madness? Brief? Madness of bliss. Madness of bliss being brief. This is something important. Because I think in all of our lives we have experienced this. If you're in a riot, if you find yourself doing something very bad, in terms of zina, you're committing adultery, or unfortunately, you have intoxicated yourself with some substance, the madness, the chaos, the disruption in the harmonic way, your vision, your perception is distorted. Anything can happen. You don't know what's going to happen 3 seconds from now. You don't even know where your mind is going to go 3 seconds from now. When you're sober, it's quite different. And it's a blissful state until the plane lands and the withdrawals come. The smoke clears, the smells arrive, the veil of reality is now back, right? So when he says this as a brief madness of bliss, really understand like that level of what he's talking about, which is experienced only by those who suffer most deeply. So here, when you're really suffering and you have a break from it, yeah, there is a sort of bliss from it, but also when you're suffering, there can be a blissful madness from it. Sometimes your brain will try to overcome it, and it might suppress that in the form of PTSD, but the brain's ability to adapt to a high-stress scenario is amazing, and some people can get some bliss from it. I think you could look at a warrior, for example. Like, let's say 1,000 years ago, he's in the heat of battle. He knows at any second an arrow can come. He knows a horse can trample him, but he's in the thick of it. There's a blissful madness there, an energy that cannot be mimicked. And he's suffering with his body, the overwhelmingness of his 5 senses being tested, his hearing, his sight, his physical limbs, his joints, right? Having to possess reason heavily in that. You know, it's a blissful thing because all the shock to the nervous system, it's just all coming in waves, unending. The smell even, having to control that. It's madness, right? The sounds of people groaning to their end. So Imagine like the shouts that the Aztecs, the Mayans, and many Native American tribes did during battle would cause a lot of panic in some. Like, they make these rooster sounds, these yelps, these yips, that when so many of the soldiers are doing it, it creates a huge echo sound. And in the conquest of, New Mexico, the conquest of Spain, rather, Bernal Diaz explains how when the Aztecs would jump from the trees and they would make this sound, the Spaniards would become unnerved, right? Because they were so good at hiding in the trees and swooping down. It was very overwhelming. So this bliss of battle is madness, and they're suffering deeply. And no one can understand it except for those who participated in it, right? So, male warriors getting that is another example. Maybe you could also say when we women are giving birth, the pain is horrific. That either you can get to where you're sweating so much to where when the contractions are paused for, because they come in intervals, and you're just like, oh, and then it goes again and again, and then you're like, oh geez, and then when it's finally over, your body's like, wow. So there's some interesting examples of how you can speculate and think within your own life how Nietzsche's point here is quite on the spot. Weariness that wants to reach the ultimate with one leap, with one fatal leap, a poor ignorant weariness that does not want to want any more. This created all gods and afterworlds. Well, I would kind of think that's bizarre. One reason is because for us Muslims, Allah is never tired. Nor does he feel any fatigue in guarding and preserving them, for he is the Most High, the Supreme in glory, Atu'al Kursi, the verse of the throne, right? So Allah doesn't feel any tiredness, whereas there is that metaphor in the Old Testament, God rested on the seventh day. So that, is something people speak about where they say, well, God wanted humans to have a day of rest, to be good and relax. And then you have the Jews who went to the extremes of the Sabbath, right? Then you had the Christians who they close everything on Sunday and it's a family day, Sunday family dinner, a day of reconnection. For us Muslims, we have Friday, but Allah Azza for us can never tire, right? So weariness is a inappropriate thing for us to even put next to any of Allah's attributes, because an all-powerful God can never tire, right? Because if you have all the power, you have all the energy. The giver of energy is Allah, right? He's full of bounty, and it's easy for him. Nothing is difficult for him. Now, when he talks about one fatal leap, this is the kind of feeling of when a soldier, he makes that giant leap. A good example is when I read in the Conquest of Spain, right, by Bernal Diaz. The Spaniards have put pockets of gold in their, on their persons. They're trying to ride their horse, and the drawbridge, the way the Aztecs had water around their capital, they're drawing up the drawbridge. There's a big leap there, and there has been hard fighting. They're exhausted, and people had to jump across this, or fall to their end into this murky water where Aztecs were in canoes shooting so many arrows. So this tired leap that those soldiers probably felt was like, either I make it to the other side or I fall into this canal, and then the Aztecs in the canoes finish me off, right? Because there was a hard run out of the capital. There was people on buildings chucking rocks, arrows literally everywhere, right? It was a hard battle. They had to escape after Montezuma that was his name, I think. It was Montezuma. I don't want to confuse the Peruvian leader with the Aztec one. But that's the gist of it, is like this leap of like, oh, fine, now let's go. So this returning, like, if you make it, we're tired, we're weary. If we make it, we make it. And if we're not, we perish. And does not want to want anymore. This also can relate to people when, let's say, they had a shipwreck. They've been swimming in the ocean. They're almost to the beach. Their body is so physically collapsed that they're right at the beach and they just give up, and then the current carries them in and they wash up on the shore. They're totally exhausted. They don't want to want anymore. And they're there. And their weariness is so strong. And either the crabs are going to eat them, right? Because crabs will eat you if you lay up on the shore. Or someone's going to find them and like resuscitate them. Or the tide will literally push them onto the shore and then pull them back in. And then engulf them with waves. And then they're fish food, right? So it really goes to show that this sort of one fatal leap, this weariness where you don't want to want anymore, is definitely found in so many aspects of history and also practical reality, right? Very interesting. What do you think? He is quite potent in stirring our mind, but if you're strong in faith and you take a step back and you see what he's getting at, you can also almost do dawah through his works, because Nietzsche is extremely popular amongst atheists, nihilistic atheists, and anarchists, and National Socialists. So he was a figure that wrote in such a way where people really felt like he had a key to overcoming certain aspects of human consciousness. So by reading him, you can, inshallah, prepare yourself with rhetoric that will aid you in giving proper discussion formats with a Nietzschean lover, right? Someone who is really into his philosophy. And the cool part is, none of them are all the same, depending on how they learned it. And there's a big difference between people who read Nietzsche and then learned it as well with a teacher, and those who learned it from a teacher, and those who never read the actual book themselves, right? Because if they never read his works themselves, you can't trust their opinions on Nietzsche, because all they did was parrot what someone else said, and they haven't interacted with the text themselves. Because the way a teacher presents it is a little bit less, entertaining, a little bit more boring and dry. But when you read it yourself like this, or you hear some commentary, no two people are going to have the same thoughts and stuff. And you're free to do this with, literature such as Nietzsche's work. Because that's kind of what it does in philosophy, is you're trying to see what's the wisdom behind his poetic way of writing. And what's going on here? What's the deeper issue behind what he's saying, right? That's what's great about philosophy, is it allows you to kind of see the triple meanings behind everything he's being said, and then the interpretations and applications of such phrases have multiple variations, and it's always fun to do textual analysis upon such works. So hopefully you had fun, you thought there was something cool there, because I know I did, and have a good day.